Ano mang mangyari, di kita iiwan. Ang paglalaban ko. Huminaw tag, DJ. Umul ng tubig. Ako na sa taas na. Sila ng, well, yeah. Huminaw tag, YouTube. Review ko. Ano mang mangyari, di kita iiwan. Review ko. Anime story mode. So explain. Patayin mo ito sa labas, Ching.
Celebrate what makes you perfectly imperfect together with Cadbury.
Na-raise? Nabago mo yung schedule or na-raise mo lang yung LOL na lamento?
Yeah. Explain. Bakit?
Wala lang.
Ano ba spelling story?
No, purpose mo ba?
Subaru Natsuki, an average commoner in Japan, faces the most incredible plot twist in his life when he's suddenly transported to another world. It all happened late at night one day as Subaru stepped out to get groceries in the convenience store. After getting all he needs from the store, he walks outside to get back home. Before he gets far, Subaru gets a weird feeling of some supernatural force around him. He ignores the signs and preps himself to cross the street. Just as he steps forward, his eyes begin to itch. He rubs his eyes with his hands only to open them and find himself in another world entirely. The day in that world was bright and filled with people in medieval clothing. Subaru takes a few moments to absorb his new reality as he stands near a fountain staring into the environment in front of him. It was then that it dawned on him that he'd just been summoned into another world. Subaru eventually accepts his fate and keeps walking. Meanwhile, a lady who's somewhere around the city runs frantically on the building rooftops, holding a weird heirloom and smiling. Subaru, on the other hand, begins to think about the endless possibilities and upgrades his body may have had during the teleportation. At some point, he begins to think he has magic as that's a usual perk with those who are transported to another world. He even tries testing it on an accident that's about to happen in front of him. Unfortunately, he finds out the hard way that he doesn't have magic. Subaru continues his journey through the city to find a place to stay. On his way, he finds a stall and tries buying some fruits with his old currency. The stall owner chases him out after seeing his old currency and Subaru continues moving. He also tries interacting with other people in the city, but he gets shunned every damn time. When he gets tired of all the stress, Subaru sits in an alleyway to think about his situation. He takes out his phone and finds out it still works in the world he's in. Frustrated, he puts his phone back into his pocket and begins complaining about his terrible odds. He wonders where the beautiful maiden who summoned him into another world was. Just then, three muggers find him sitting alone in the alleyway and hold him up to rob him. Before they can do anything, the lady running on rooftops passes by and greets them before going her way. When she's gone, Subaru tries to test his newfound strength. Unfortunately for him, the muggers had a knife on them. On seeing the knife, Subaru apologizes for punching them and gets beaten up harshly. While receiving his beating, a beautiful lady stops by to ask them about her stolen heirloom. The muggers ask her if she was there to save the kid, but she says she isn't. Then, they tell her about the rooftop lady who passed by earlier and nudge her in the right direction. The lady, after getting the information she needs, the beautiful lady saves Subaru with her spirit magic. When the muggers are gone, the lady asks Subaru about the location of her insignia heirloom. Subaru tells her he knows nothing about such a thing and then faints shortly. The lady and her pet talking cat contemplate leaving Subaru to die there, but they eventually end up helping him. A few moments later, Subaru wakes up on the lap of the pet cat and throws a fuss over it. The lady asks him to pay her back for rescuing him by telling her the location of her insignia. Subaru gives her more information about the rooftop lady and calls it quits. The lady thanks him for the help and considers it repaid. She takes her leave, but Subaru follows her out of the alley. Now on the street, he convinces her to let him accompany her on her quest to find the thief who stole her heirloom. The lady accepts his request and leads the way forward. Over the next few scenes, Subaru and the lady ask every stall owner in town for the whereabouts of the insignia thief. A few hours later, the duo settled down for a break on the balcony of a building. There, they introduce each other formally. The beautiful lady introduces herself as Sadala and Subaru calls himself Subaru. After hearing his name, Sadala gets the feeling that Subaru is from a noble family. She feels his hands and confirms her suspicions. After their break, they continue their search. At one point, they find a little girl with green hair looking lost and confused in the middle of town. Subaru and Sadala argue over whether they're to help the little girl or not. Sadala ends up walking over to the little girl to ask a few questions. However, the girl starts crying loudly. Subaru walks in and pulls a coin magic trick, making the girl smile. Then, they take her around town to find her mother. Thankfully, they didn't have to go far as the little girl was reunited with her mother. Later on, the duo settle down by a bridge to talk about their progress. Subaru argues with Sadala again about good deeds and the like. Sadala concludes that Subaru is someone who likes wasting his life on useless things. She then tells him about her nature as a half-elf, half-human. Still, Subaru compliments her beauty. Sadala gets visibly touched and shies away from the embarrassment. Eventually, Subaru takes them back to their main quest. They get to their next poi, which is a merchant somewhere around town. There, Subaru tries to bribe the merchant to spill some information, but he soon finds out that both of them are broke, so he dismisses them. Before they leave, the little girl they helped earlier arrives with her mother to see their father, the merchant they are asking for information. After hearing about the help they rendered to his family, the merchant apologizes and offers his help to them. Hours later, by evening time, Subaru and his new Ice-Sky girlfriend, Sadala, walk the abandoned slums of town, scared of every alleyway and corner they pass by. At one point, Sadala complains to Subaru that she's already out of time and must return the insignia before nightfall. Puck, the pet talking cat, also decides to call it a day as it is dark already. Sadala greets her goodbye and watches her disappear into thin air. Now alone with Subaru, Sadala makes it known that he shouldn't be getting any ideas at all. She tells him about lesser spirits like Puck that take time to fully develop into an original spirit, and proceeds to light herself up to glow like the stars in the sky. Moving on, Subaru and Sadala keep walking towards a particular direction. They find a passerby moments later and ask him about Felt, the lady they were looking for. The person tells them about the notorious Felt and tells them to be prepared to negotiate their stuff back. Subaru and Sadala keep moving forward, arguing like two people in love before considering working together to keep them safe. Subaru takes the first watch and lets Sadala sleep. After Sadala is away, Subaru takes a tour around the house they're in. There, he finds various eerie stuff lurking around there. Subaru walks a little further into the house and finds a freshly mutilated body lying on the floor with blood everywhere. Before he gets to take in all the horror, a lady speaks behind him and pushes him to the floor. Subaru gets up quickly, barfs and collapses. Sadala walks into the room to find out what's wrong with Subaru. Unfortunately for her, she gets hit in the head before she realizes what's going on. Subaru holds her hand and tries to keep himself alive so he can save both of them. However, his body gave out way too quickly. Almost immediately, Subaru wakes up to see the merchant from earlier asking him to buy some of the apples in his hands. Subaru gets confused and tells the merchant he's broke beyond comparison. The merchant throws him out and Subaru gets back to the streets. He tries to remember his life before then and remembers Sadala and her pet talking cat, Puck. He also checks the wound on his belly and finds out it's already gone. Confused, Subaru rushes through a familiar alleyway and finds the three muggers from the previous day waiting there for him. Tired of facing the same troubles again, Subaru tricks them into believing he is powerless. When they let their guards down, he beats the living shit out of them and continues searching for Sadala. He gets back to the abandoned slums from earlier and finds the building they stayed in the previous night. He bangs the door and finds out the inhabitant is none other than the dead body he found the previous night. Subaru gets even more confused and asks the old man if he's ever died before. The old man laughs and tells him he's never closed his eyes to death before. Subaru then asks him about Sadala and the insignia. However, the old man tells him he knows nothing about such. He then tells Subaru about a shipment of loot he's receiving later that day and tells Subaru to stay behind to check whether or not his insignia is there. Subaru asks him about Felt, the weird young lady, and the old man still tells him he knows nothing about her. The old man then asks for some payment and Subaru gives him some potato chips from the previous world he was in. Subaru waits outside the house for Felt to arrive. When she does, he talks to her about the insignia and takes her inside. While inside the house, Felt and the old man argue with each other over spoiled milk and all that. The trio get to tease each other for a few minutes before Felt talks business. She drops a precious heirloom and asks Subaru to pay for the jewel inside it. Subaru tells her he doesn't have any money on him, but he could trade his cell phone for the heirloom. Felt and the old man ask him about the phone in his hand and Subaru takes a picture of them. When asked what that was, Subaru lies and tells them the device had magic that could freeze any moment in time and then store it. This fools the old man and Felt well enough for them to ask for the phone's worth. Again, Subaru tells them it's probably worth 20 holy coins. The old man and Felt believe his lie but then tell him about a former client of theirs who wanted the heirloom insignia for 10 holy coins. To avoid breaching their contract, Subaru would have to follow them to the point of negotiation and legally buy the insignia from them. As they discuss their terms and conditions, someone knocks on the door and Felt gets up to answer it. Minutes later, she returns inside with her client. The client, who is a familiar lady, weirdly spooks Subaru, almost like he's seen her before. Still, he calms down and openly negotiates the insignia with her over some drinks. Subaru shows her the item he's putting up for sale and tells her the worth. The lady reveals her identity to them. It turns out she's just a proxy representing her real client. As such, she's prepared to increase the price for the insignia to 20 holy coins if they're ready to sell it to her that instant. Subaru caves in defeat, but the old man tells him he's still getting the insignia since his phone is probably worth more than 20 holy coins. The negotiation ends quickly with Elsa, the proxy, getting the short end of the stick. She gets up to take her leave and asks Subaru what he's going to do with the insignia. Dummy Subaru blatantly tells her he'll return it to the owner. Elsa realizes Subaru and the other two may be part of her enemy, so she attacks the three of them. The old man steps in to protect his people but unfortunately ends up losing his life. When she's done with Old Man Rom, Elsa prepares to take her leave. Felt, however, accuses her of being a psychopath and launches herself towards her. Sadly, Elsa read her movements perfectly, aiming for the opening and killed her. Subaru goes out of control and blindly attacks her. Elsa pushes him away and goes in for the attack. Although Subaru dodges the fatal part of the attack, he still gets ghastly injured in the belly. He collapses and closes his eyes to death only to find himself reincarnated to that same day. This time, he faints for a few hours and wakes up near the merchant's stall. The merchant gives him some apples, but as he's about to take it, he spots Sadala walking along the street. He rushes towards her and tries to explain himself to her, but Sadala doesn't know him anymore. Subaru then makes a big mistake by calling her the Witch of Envy, just like Felt had advised him to do. Hearing him call her that, Sadala gets really pissed and warns him never to call her that again. As she prepares to head out, Felt, who's been hiding in a corner all this while, approaches Sadala and steals her insignia. Sadala immediately chases after Felt, despite Subaru's warnings. Subaru follows the two girls and runs into the same alleyway again. Just as he's about to leave, he finds the three muggers from the previous days waiting for him. He gets super pissed at them and just walks right past them. Sadly for him, one of the muggers stabbed his back. Subaru falls to the ground bleeding profusely as the three muggers argue and bicker at one another for making such a mistake. Eventually, the muggers leave poor Subaru lying on the ground and run away to avoid getting caught. Subaru passes on that instant and is reborn right in front of the merchant's store again. The merchant hands him an apple and asks for him to buy it, just like he always does, but Subaru refuses to buy it. Instead, he gets to the back of the store to check for his stuff. He finds his back wound gone already and decides to try a different approach this time. He accepts the fact that he's been in a time leap all this while and hopes minding his business would prevent such bad things from happening to him. So he plans his life perfectly this time. All he has to do is become an inventor using his knowledge from his past world and make enough money to live a luxurious life. He then asks the merchant for his thoughts about his plan, but the merchant chooses to refrain from Subaru's problems. Fair enough. Subaru hits the streets of the town and experiences a very weird deja vu act playing out in front of him. He finds two people holding a lost little girl to find her mother. This makes him suddenly remember the little girl he and Sadala saved in the previous time loop. Subaru understands that he's destined to meet Sadala one way or the other, so he cuts his selfish plan and returns to the merchant. There, he asks the merchant about the pickpocketing occurrences in the town. The merchant tells him about one that happened not too long ago. He points Subaru towards the magic attack marks on the walls nearby and gives him a few more pointers towards the right direction in his investigation. Subaru thanks him and continues into the streets thinking about meeting Sadala and getting her insignia. Sadly for him, he runs into the three muggers in the alleyway again. This time, he shouts at the top of his voice, calling for help in any way he can. The three muggers call his bluff at first, but are soon caught with their tail between their legs as the sword saint, Reinhard, arrives on the scene to protect Subaru. The muggers recognize him as bad news immediately and scram for dear life. After they're gone, Subaru thanks Reinhard for saving him. Reinhard tells him it's nothing and just urges him to live life and keep out of trouble. Subaru notices his uniform and asks about his guard uniform. Reinhard tells him he's off duty for that day. The two talk about a few more random things until Subaru makes one final request. He asks Reinhard to tell Sadala, whom he described perfectly, to avoid the looted house in any way she can. Reinhard nods in agreement and lets Subaru go. That evening, Subaru gets himself to the slums and asks around for Felt's den. After getting directed towards the right direction, he heads to the place. On his way there, however, he bumps into the worst person he could ever see, the Bowel Hunter, aka Elsa, the person who's been killing him throughout his time. Elsa shows him her usual psychotic side and teases him a little bit before leaving. Subaru heaves a sigh of relief and keeps walking towards Felt's den. When he gets there, he checks around hoping to see Felt. What he didn't know was that Felt was already behind him. When he did, it was already too late as Felt had already mistaken him for an intruder. She fights him for a little while before stopping to verify his identity. Subaru tells her he's there to trade his Mesha, Aka's cell phone, for the insignia she's to sell to a particular Elsa. Felt stops fighting him and takes a look at the Mesha Subaru wanted to trade for the insignia. Subaru tries to get her to trade the insignia for the phone at that instant, but Felt would rather have her old man. Rom. Check the phone before she makes a deal. Subaru wastes no time as he rushes towards Rom's house so the deal can be done as quickly as possible. On their way there, Subaru gets very sentimental with Felt and gets bitten by the frustrated young girl. After getting there, Rom checks the Mesha and rates the phone higher than most holy items he's seen. Subaru gets very happy and believes the negotiations have ended right there. However, Felt was suspicious about some things as she tells him to stop so she can ask him some questions and all. Subaru stops and begs her to trust him. He fears the assassin, Elsa, will soon arrive to take them all out. Felt, however, refuses to trust his excuses even with all the begging and bowing. Eventually, the dreadful knock on the door is heard and Felt goes to answer it. Subaru begs her not to open it, but she does so eventually and finds Sadala on the other side. Sadala sees herself into Rom's house and threatens Felt to return her insignia so no harm comes to her. Felt takes some steps back and refuses to give her insignia. Instead, she talks a little about Subaru wanting to return her insignia to her, which surprises Sadala herself. She admits to never knowing a thing about Subaru or even meeting him in real life before. She then continues talking to Felt about her insignia, and fails to realize the assassin creeping up close behind her. Thankfully, Subaru notices in time to inform Puck, her pet talking cat, to block Elsa's attack. After her first failed attack, Elsa shows herself and promises to slaughter everybody in the room as opposed to her initial plan, which was to do away with Sadala alone. Subaru steps up and shames her for being such a bad lady. He yaps on and on about some other meaningless things and buys Puck enough time to restore all his mana to attack the assassin. When Puck's ready, he throws a bunch of crystals at Elsa but doesn't even manage to scratch her. Elsa switches to the offensive and begins attacking Sadala. Sadala, on the other hand, accepts the fight. Together, the duo go at it for a while with Rom, Subaru and Felt spectating from the back of the building. At one point in the battle, Sadala manages to trap Elsa. She directs one large attack at Elsa, but she still manages to dodge it. Puck becomes very tired as he's run out of mana, so he retreats to the spirit world to rest up, leaving Sadala all alone to fight the dreadful Elsa. While the two fight, Felt finally thanks Subaru for saving her earlier. If only she'd listened to him earlier on, this probably wouldn't have happened. Old man Rom decides to go help Sadala out. He picks up his blade and fights Elsa with all his strength. Sadly, Elsa was too fast for him. She corners him and slashes his neck before continuing her fight with Sadala. Subaru clenches his fist and considers dying again to restart his day. However, the pain of dying on Elsa's blade was too much to bear. With time running out, Subaru makes a split-second decision to save Felt at all costs. As Elsa's about to slash Felt up, Subaru gets in the way and carries her. Then, he tells Felt to wait for an opening so she can escape. Felt still tries to argue her way through, but Subaru tells her it's for the best. He picks up a large wooden bat and finally distracts Elsa long enough for Felt to escape. After she's gone, Elsa slashes Subaru to the ground and pauses their fight for a while. In the meantime, Sadala thanks Subaru for giving the fight his all, despite being the weaker one amongst them all. Subaru, upon hearing those words, gets invigorated and challenges Elsa to a fight. Elsa takes him up on his challenge and traps his leg. She then raises her knife to deal enough damage to Subaru, but she's stopped halfway by Reinhard, who orders them to stop fighting. Upon seeing a stronger opponent, Elsa takes some steps back and introduces herself to the powerful saint. Reinhard tells her he was summoned over there by Felt when he found her running frantically through the deserted streets. Reinhard asks Elsa to surrender, but Elsa tells him it's not possible. He chuckles a bit and asks Subaru to stay near Sadala, who is busy healing Rom with her magic. Subaru has a little discussion with Sadala as she heals the injured old man. Meanwhile, Reinhard draws a fake sword and uses it to fight Elsa. Reinhard destroys her first weapon and keeps up with the attacks. When Sadala is done healing old man Rom, Subaru gives the signal for Reinhard to go all out on Elsa. Reinhard smiles and uses the rusty sword in his hand to unleash a very powerful magic attack that blows the entire place up. After taking care of Elsa, Subaru finally stands tall and thanks Reinhard for saving him this time. At least he won't have to die and be reborn to that day again. Just as he lets his guard down, Elsa shows up from behind and tries to surprise attack Sadala. Thankfully, Subaru manages to pick up a wooden baton and save Sadala just in time. Elsa, seeing as she's failed woefully, retreats and promises to be back. Subaru gets back up and introduces himself. He then asks Sadala, the beautiful lady, to tell him her real name. Sadala looks very sheepishly and names herself Emilia. Then, she thanks Subaru for saving her and extends her hand for a handshake. Subaru sighs and accepts her handshake. Later on, Reinhard picks up the weapon Subaru used to block Elsa's attack from earlier, and realizes it's been cut in half. Just then, it dawned on Subaru that he was injured in the attack. He loses consciousness and collapses. While he's passed out, Reinhard asks Sadala what she plans to do with Subaru. Sadala, aka Emilia, tells him she'll take Subaru to her mansion. As for Felt, she thanks Emilia for her help and returns Emilia's insignia to her. Reinhard, after seeing the insignia on Felt's hands, gets very disturbed and captures her for having such an heirloom in her hands. After rendering her unconscious, Reinhard takes a long hard look at the moon and returns to the palace with Felt. The following day, Subaru wakes up in Emilia's mansion. He checks for his wounds and is surprised to find it's healed up completely. Confused, Subaru gets up from his bed and walks around the corridors searching for a life form. He discovers that the hallway is a looping one, so he opens the first door he sets his eyes on and finds the famous librarian Betty doing her thing. He mistakes her for a little girl and begins saying derogatory things to her. Betty punishes his disrespectful ass by electrifying the life out of him and stealing all his mana before sending him out of her quarters. Subaru wakes up again for the third time that day. This time, he hears two ladies talking silently about him. He focuses his ears to hear what they say and finds out they are criticizing every part of him. He jolts up from his bed and finds the cute ladies shying away from him. Shortly afterwards, Emilia walks into the room to check up on her guest. On seeing Subaru, Emilia discusses a few things with him and the girl. When they're done, Subaru gets out of bed and into the yard for his morning exercise with Emilia. There, he instructs Emilia to follow him for directions. Puck also shows up behind Emilia and resumes work for the day. At that point, Subaru ends their morning exercise session. He holds Puck in his hands and massages its soft fur. Emilia stands and watches Subaru play with her support soldier. She smiles a little and calls him weird for caressing her cat like that. Just then, the two maids from earlier arrive to inform Emilia that their lord, Roswaal, is back. Emilia and Subaru return to the mansion to meet the lord of the castle. Initially, they meet Betty, who fondles Puck like her own. But when Roswaal comes by, Subaru mistakes him for a clown who was hired to entertain them during breakfast. However, when he finds out that Roswaal is the lord of the manor, he swallows his spit and settles to eat breakfast with the lot. At breakfast, they discuss the chores and responsibilities of the house as Subaru questions the two maids about what they do at the mansion. He tastes their food and appreciates the complexity of the flavors in the entire dish. After eating, Roswaal tells Subaru about the happenings in the royal palace. Apparently, the kingdom is currently without a king as it's being plagued by an epidemic. Subaru gets a little scared of him being off now that he's known the truth behind the kingdom. He even begins to suspect himself to be the patient zero of the epidemic plaguing the kingdom. However, Roswaal tells him not to fret and that nobody thinks of him as a traitor. Emilia butts into the discussion and shows Subaru her insignia. When asked about it, she explains to Subaru that the insignia is an item that proves someone's worthiness to be the next king of the kingdom. The lot continues talking for a few more minutes until Subaru asks to be hired to work as a butler in the mansion. Since nobody objects, Subaru is taken to the dressing room and measured by the two ladies from earlier. When they're done measuring him, they take him on a brief tour around the mansion so he doesn't get lost on the job. At one point in the tour, Subaru finds Betty petting Puck. She throws him out one time and then changes her room, only for him to figure out the right door and catch her petting Puck again. After the tour around the mansion, he begins work immediately. One of the girls shows him his tasks for the day and Subaru finishes all of them before night. Just as he's about to sleep, one of the girls brings him his clothes. Subaru does a few more minor adjustments before calling it a day. The following day, Subaru tries cutting some potatoes for their breakfast dish. His terrible expertise in the job causes him to cut his finger. Moving on, Subaru continues his chores for the day and finishes them before it gets too dark. Under the cover of the dark, Roswaal discusses a few things about Subaru with one of the girl maids. The girl maid tells him about Subaru's conspicuous acts, but soon tells Roswaal he shouldn't be a problem in the long run. Roswaal commends her observation and continues his thing. Meanwhile, Emilia is seen with Subaru enjoying their time on the lawn. Subaru gets emotional at one point and expresses his innermost feelings to Emilia. He gets so carried away that he accidentally shows Emilia the cuts on his fingers. When he realizes it, it's already too late. Anyway, Subaru still asks Emilia out on a date to go sightseeing with him. Emilia initially refuses to go, but after much persuasion, she soon accepts it. Subaru's mood gets lightened up and he rushes over to Betty's room to disturb her again. This time, Betty gets very restive and throws him out of her room. Subaru goes to sleep as a happy man as he begins to count down to the next day. Sadly for him, fate had a different thing in mind for poor Subaru. Moments after he wakes up the following day, he finds out that his time has been reset and the events which happened the previous night never happened. Subaru is confused. However, this time, he decides to take a different approach. Moments after he wakes up, the two maid angel girls, Rem and Ram, appear near him to welcome him back to the mansion. Subaru covers his face and rushes over to another room to reflect on the kind of spell or curse he's been placed under. Unknown to him, he'd broken into the terrible Beatrice's library. When he finds out, it's already too late as Betty, or Beatrice is already talking to him. From their conversation, it turns out Subaru had previously woken up earlier that day and had come to disturb Betty's peace. Subaru thanks her for her time and heads out to the yard to double-check something. Betty lets him out and Subaru gets to the yard to find Emilia. There, he sees her walking across the lawn and approaches her. Subaru couldn't be any happier to see Emilia and her adorable face. He talks to her a little bit and gets the happiness he needs to not fall into total despair. Even Puck, the fluffy pet talking cat, shows up to join their conversation. When they're done talking, Subaru rushes back inside to have dinner with everyone, including Roswaal, the lord of the mansion. Moments into eating breakfast, Subaru asks Roswaal to employ him as a butler in the mansion again. Subaru plans to relive the same experience he had the previous so he can break the curse. This plan almost works, but unfortunately for him, he is forced to have a break in the bathhouse in the middle of the day. While at the bathhouse soaking away his sorrows, the impulsive Roswaal walks in unclothed and teases Subaru before getting into the bath to chill out. While taking their baths, the duo talk about the maid girls, Rem, the blue-haired one, and Ram, the pink-haired one. After he's done, Subaru steps out of the bathhouse and finds Ram at the entrance bringing Roswaal's clothes to him. Subaru, upon seeing her, covers all his exposed areas to prevent Ram from seeing his small PP. Ram shows no interest in whatever is down there. Instead, she tells him to get ready to meet her later that night for something she couldn't discuss there. Subaru rushes to his room fidgeting as he thinks Ram wanted to grape him or something. However, when the night comes, Ram enters his room and tells him she's there to help him learn to read and write. Once he can master that skill, he can help out more in the house. Subaru, after thinking about the good this can do, agrees to learn their characters. He picks up the calligraphy pen and begins scribbling on the papyrus in front of him. A few moments later, he begins pouring his heart out to Ram, completely unaware that she was already asleep. When he sees her moaning softly on the bed, he angrily breaks his pen. The following day, Subaru wakes up early and puts on his butler's attire again, ready for work. He asks Rem, the blue-haired maid, if she could allow him to sew her clothes for her. However, Rem tells him there's no need. Subaru is very surprised at Rem's poor sense of fashion, so he tries convincing her to put on more clothes besides their maid outfits. Rem sees this as an insult and begins to say insulting things towards Subaru. Eventually, she walks away from Subaru and urges him to continue his day's work. Subaru joins the girls in the kitchen and cuts his fingers again from his inexperience. Ram chastises him for being such a terrible butler and also urges him to take care of his hair. After cutting vegetables in the kitchen, the trio headed out to the yard to trim out the bushes. There, they discuss hair and duties in the mansion. Hours pass by and Subaru is seen cleaning the bathhouse. Just then, Rem interrupts him and apologizes for making insulting remarks towards him earlier that day. Subaru tells her he'll forgive her on the condition that she helps comb his hair. Rem picks up another scrubbing brush and joins Subaru in washing the floor. She says a few derogatory things to him and then succumbs to his wishes. Subaru, after his work, follows Rem out to town to get some supplies. At the supply area, he finds some kids playing and joins them in their fun till Rem finishes getting all the supplies. On their way home, Rem and Subaru talk about kids like they're some bad people. Subaru tries to stop her from talking down on children, but with Rem being Rem, she continues talking about it. Eventually, Subaru changes the topic and says a few good things about Ram, and this makes Rem smile. That night, Emilia fills in for Ram to supervise Subaru's learning session for the night. Subaru's mind beats out of rhythm as he gets pretty scared about what to do. Seconds later, he musters up courage and asks Emilia out on a date. Emilia initially asks him about what a date is. Subaru explains it to her and convinces her to follow him on a date. Subaru becomes so happy that he promises never to sleep that night so he can survive the night and avoid dying in his sleep. Unfortunately for Subaru, he was about to experience another canon event in his night. As he waits anxiously for morning in his room, he feels a sudden cold and the lights go out. Subaru rushes to the corridor shivering and wondering why his body feels queasy. Sadly, it turns out he'd been poisoned earlier that day and the poison was already taking effect. Subaru collapses in the hallway and is slashed by an assassin sent to kill him. Subaru wakes up in agonizing pain as he returns to the same state he was in his time leap. He unintentionally scares Ram and Rem, who are near him at the time. Subaru realizes they probably hadn't met him before, so he tries to calm them down. Then, he dresses up and walks through the hallway, trying to retrace his steps and possibly figure out what the hell happened the previous night. Betty, who seems to be following him, interrupts him and calls him irritating. Apparently, he'd already entered her library without her knowing. Subaru apologizes for causing her any issues and asks her to serve him some tea. Betty takes offense at such a statement, so she politely asks Subaru to get out of her library. Subaru doesn't seem to get the memo initially as he continues to pry into whatever book she is reading. When she couldn't take it anymore, she threw Subaru out her window and he fell to the shrubs below. Emilia finds Subaru covered in manure from the shrubs and tells him about it. Subaru throws a fuss over being covered in manure, but Emilia tells him it's okay since he didn't know about it initially. To help rid him of all the gunk, Emilia wakes Puck and asks him to wash Subaru up. Puck appears in Emilia's hands and uses a water-themed spell to clean Subaru up. Moments later, Emilia, Puck, and Subaru all play on the lawn there in the yard. Subaru gets into a little fight with Puck and causes Emilia to laugh out loud from the cuteness. Subaru gets very proud of himself for finally making Emilia laugh. Emilia, who noticed Subaru adding the tan suffix to her name, asks him about it. Subaru tells her it's what friends call each other and she should be proud to have such a name from him. Emilia, on hearing that she may have just made one friend, gets very flustered and covers her eyes in shame. Subaru talks secretly with Puck and finds out it's one of Emilia's long-lost wishes to be called such nicknames. After much explanation, the two maids, Rem and Ram, arrive to inform of Roswell's return. This time, Subaru decided to try a different approach. He plans to work meticulously through the next 3 days just so he can quietly figure out who his assassin is, provided they're amongst them. When Roswell asks him what he wishes to do, Subaru chooses to be a normal guest in the mansion, instead of asking to work with them as a butler. Roswell grants him his wish, and Subaru spends the rest of his day investigating the mystery around his death. By evening time, Subaru tries to talk to Ram but gets ignored. The following day, Subaru approaches Betty to ask her about the type of spell or curse he's been placed under. You know, the curse that makes him die in his sleep and wake up completely fine in a time leap. Initially, Betty tries to push him away, but Subaru begs her to hear him out. After hearing all he had to say, she decided to help him. After a few readings, Subaru finds out he's been cursed by a shaman who seems to be draining his mana each time he goes to sleep. Subaru asks him if there is anyone who could do such magic in the mansion. Betty tells her only she and Puck could do such high-end magic. Betty also tells him she was the one who helped heal him back when he was brought to the mansion. Subaru finds this hard to believe, so he tries to tease the truth out of her. Betty gets understandably pissed and throws him out of her window again. He gets himself up from the grass and continues investigating his death. From the information he could gather, Subaru finds out he died only 3 times in the capital before he was brought to the mansion. This could only mean he's not allowed to die again since he's already died 3 times in the mansion. He then recalls his last meeting with Puck where he asked him to keep an eye on Amelia for him. While he gathers his thoughts together, Rem interrupts him to serve him some tea. She sits on his bed and asks after his studies. Subaru tells her he's been making some progress in his studies. Moving on from that, he narrates a story about a red and blue ogre to Ram. In summary, the story entailed the blue ogre having to lose everything just to save the red ogre who couldn't live life on his own. After hearing the sad story, Ram insults both ogres for being illogical and letting their hearts decide for them. The blue ogre would have taught the red ogre how to live on his own, while the red ogre would have avoided being a burden to his friend. Subaru sighs and chooses both ogres as they were only trying to get through life. Ram looks down on his answer and tells him to be wiser next time. Subaru ignores her insult and talks to her about some other random fact about their kingdom and a great waterfall. Later on, she ends her conversation with Subaru and heads back to the kitchen. The following day, Subaru packs up his load to leave the mansion for his next destination. Amelia gets worried about him and asks him to reconsider leaving them. However, Subaru had already made up his mind and assured Amelia that he'd be found nonetheless. Subaru tries complimenting the angel maids once more before leaving the mansion. Amelia rushes after him to say her final goodbyes before leaving him in the hands of fate. Subaru travels through the forest and turns around just to stake out and investigate Amelia's room from there. He takes out a fancy kitchen knife and stares at it as if waiting for something to happen. By evening time, the assassin strikes again. Subaru runs for dear life and gets trapped on a cliff. He takes off his shirt and prepares himself to fight the assailant. When the assassin shows face, he's disappointed to find out his attacker is none other than Rem. Rem shows no remorse for attacking a harmless man. She even advises him to accept his fate so she can grant him a painless death. Subaru asks her what he did to deserve such treatment from her, but Rem refuses to tell him. Instead, she asks him about his true intentions for Amelia. She thought Subaru was working with Amelia's enemy. All attempts to change her mind proved very futile. Subaru then makes a last-minute attempt to make a run for it. He takes out his cell phone and flashes Rem's eyes before bailing. After running a few meters, Rem cuts his leg and immobilizes him. She then approaches him and stops his leg from bleeding just so she can get the information she needs out of his mouth. Subaru keeps begging her to let him go, as he would never harm Amelia. Unfortunately for him, Rem was hard-headed as she flogged him and kept asking him for the truth. Subaru tells her he has nothing to do with Amelia's capture or anything. He's just a guy trying his best to make friends in a new world. Sadly, Rem refuses to believe him. She tells him that his aura reeks of the witch's aura and it disgusts her. Subaru falls into total despair and starts crying. He screams his lungs out, asking Rem why she hates him so much. Rem refuses to let him finish talking as she slits his throat and leaves him to die. The following day, Subaru wakes up on the same bed with both maid sisters there with him. He freaks out a little and refuses to talk to anyone until Amelia arrives to see him. When she gets there, Subaru warns her never to have anything to do with him as he fears the curse may affect her too. He then gets the idea to tell her everything, but as he's about to do so, a dark cloud surrounds them and freezes time for a little moment. When this happens, a dark humanoid hand strolls through Subaru's body until it gets to his heart. The hand grips Subaru's heart and makes him more afraid than ever to speak out. Subaru gets out of the trance in one piece and decides to lock up and chase Amelia away. Over the next few scenes, Subaru remains on the bed thinking of his next move. Roswaal comes over to see him, but Subaru refuses to give him any audience. Later on, Betty arrives to check on Subaru. When asked why she would even care, Betty tells him Puck and Amelia made her do it. Betty then moves closer to him and discovers the stench of the Witch of Envy on Subaru. Subaru gets very surprised and asks Betty why he would even be affiliated with the witch. Betty tells him he may be getting favored by the witch for having so much of her aura. Subaru just sits there and wonders what he could do to avoid dying the 5th time in a row. He comes up with an idea and asks Betty to help keep him safe from harm for the next few days. Betty sighs and makes a contract with him to keep him safe as long as he's still in the mansion. Subaru gets so emotional and covers his face with his hands. Betty tells him to cut the crap and just be happy she agreed to help him. Later that night, Subaru has a nightmare about his previous encounter with Rem. In the dream, he relived the horrific moment with Rem. Thankfully, Betty's protection spell helped him overcome the nightmare, and he returned to his sleep peacefully. The following morning, Betty wakes him up and tells him to avoid breaking anything in her library. Subaru spends half of the day there in the library helping Betty out. At one point, she steps out of her library to get something, leaving Subaru inside. Subaru is left alone with thousands of books. He gets scared a little and opens the door to check out the building. He sees the shining sun and basks in its gracefulness as he walks to the hallway. Emilia catches up to him a little while later and asks him to follow her somewhere. Subaru blindly follows Emilia until they arrive in front of a room. Subaru is about to ask Emilia what the matter is, but Ram's screams stop him from doing so. Subaru enters the room and finds Ram crying over her sister's dead body. Subaru wonders why and how Rem died, but Roswaal tells him Rem had died of weakness, almost as if she fell asleep and couldn't wake up again. Subaru realizes that Rem wasn't the shaman he was after. Emilia asks Subaru to tell them anything that could help them understand what was going on. Subaru tries to tell them, but he remembers the incident with the humanoid hand and stops himself from talking. Just then, Ram loses her shit and attacks Subaru, as if he was the one who killed Rem. Thankfully, Betty arrived just in time to save Subaru. Roswaal gets suspicious and challenges Betty to help Subaru out. Betty stands her ground and refuses to be intimidated by him. Eventually, everyone picks sides. Subaru makes a last-minute decision and runs away from the mansion. He races to the spot where he died and thinks about dying again so Ram can be revived in his time leap. While peering around, he finds a cliff and walks towards it. However, he gets very scared to kill himself, so he falls asleep at the cliff's edge. Hours later, Betty finds him there and wakes him up. She tells him she plans on keeping him safe from himself no matter what happens. Subaru realizes he's been selfish all this while, so he decides to make the hardest decision. Initially, Betty promises to help him escape the domain so he can be free of the curse. However, Subaru realizes some other things that solidify his resolve to kill himself. He remembers Rem's words screaming at him to leave her alone. Just then, Ram catches up to them, seething in rage. Betty stands in front of Subaru to save him, but Subaru tells her not to bother, that he's already made his decision. Without thinking twice, Subaru thanks everyone for helping him out and races towards the edge of the cliff. Subaru jumps off the cliff with a smile on his face and crashes head onto the ground, ending his life in the process. Mere moments after meeting his end, Subaru wakes up on the same bed again. This time, he finds the two sisters, Rem and Ram, together. He suddenly feels a pain in his belly and squints his face. Rem and Ram immediately rush to find out what's wrong. Subaru holds their hands to confirm if they truly are the ones with him. After confirming his suspicion, Subaru smiles and appreciates the girls. Rem and Ram, who technically haven't seen him before, step back from the pervert in front of them. Subaru smiles still and waits until Emilia comes by to check up on him. During breakfast, Subaru asks Roswaal to hire him to work in the mansion. This time, he tries yet another approach different from the last one. By helping the residents with stuff they need help with, he can earn their trust and easily avoid being suspected as an enemy. Luckily for him, Roswaal has no objections towards his request as he allows Subaru to do his work in peace. Immediately after breakfast, he rushes over to different sections of the mansion to help out with one or two tasks. By lunchtime, Subaru takes a break on the lawn to chill out. Puck meets up with him there to keep him company. The duo discuss Emilia and her magic attribute. From their conversation, Subaru finds out that Emilia is a spirit arts user, not a magic user. He also figures out that he may have some magic lying somewhere inside him and asks Puck to help him find out. Puck does his mojo and figures out Subaru's attribute to be Shadow, which is a very rare magic attribute to have. At that point, Emilia returns from her chilling outing and finds Subaru throwing a fuss over his magic attribute. She calms him down and lets him know just how special his magic attribute is. Subaru still asks for some proof to know whether he's truly a shadow user. Emilia and Puck throw him into a dark trance that scares Subaru. He thankfully gets out of the trance and returns to normal before Emilia notices something's wrong. Moving on, Emilia takes Subaru on a tour around the mansion's yard to learn more about visualizing and actualizing his magic abilities. At one point, Subaru tries actualizing some of his magic abilities only to end up throwing out a large plume of black smoke over the place. After trying such a dangerous trick, he rests his body on the outdoor bench. Emilia feels sorry for his whining and puts a Bako fruit in his mouth. This fruit, which is said to stimulate a mage's mana, makes Subaru strong again so he's able to continue his day. By nightfall, Ram and Roswaal meet to discuss their guest, Subaru. Roswaal asks about him and Ram tells him they haven't noticed anything out of the ordinary yet. All they can do at the moment is watch him closely. Life goes on pretty well for Subaru as he sleeps and wakes up peacefully. The following morning, Subaru meets with Betty to ask her about lifting his curse. Betty tells him there's no way to undo a curse unless the caster themselves nullifies it. Subaru then gets curious and asks Betty about the Witch of Envy. Betty tells him all he needs to know about the witch. However, she calls the witch Sadala, which makes him remember the first time he saw Emilia, as she initially called herself Sadala. Subaru begins to wonder if the witch had taken Emilia's form just so she could curse him into the endless time leap he's currently in. Anyways, with no major conclusion, Subaru smiles and makes his resolve on the matter. When it's time to begin work for the day, Subaru plays a little with Emilia and Puck and manages to annoy them. When he leaves, Emilia becomes very uneasy because she suspects something is wrong with Subaru. Up next, Subaru drops a nice vase and quickly rushes to clean it up. Meanwhile, Emilia and Puck keep wondering what Subaru could be going through for him to be so hyperactive. Subaru keeps doing what he does best. He quickly replaced the vase he broke before Rem could notice for too long. Rem gets very suspicious about things and asks him how he knows about the vases. Subaru gives her a half-assed answer and continues doing his work hyperactively. By the end of the day, he washes his face and relaxes for once. Emilia catches up to him and tries to calm him down. Subaru still tries to keep up the act, but Emilia sees through his tricks. She takes him to her room, sits him down, sits next to him, and puts his head on her lap. Subaru asks the necessary questions and gets the answers he's looking for. Emilia tells him to get all the rest he can get before the sun rises. Subaru keeps on yapping about a few more things to avoid raising Emilia's suspicions. Emilia shuts him up by kissing his forehead. This makes Subaru sob quietly and he begins to open up. Emilia keeps quiet and lets him sleep off on her lap. Very early the next morning, Rem stops by to call Subaru to work. However, Emilia asks her to give him a day off to rest from all his troubles. By nightfall, Subaru wakes up on Emilia's lap and heads straight to Betty's room. There, he fusses over sleeping extra late. Betty then tells him of a way to nullify a curse. However, he has to have physical contact with the caster of the spell. Subaru draws out all the dots and finally gets a lead. He holds Betty up and thanks her for helping him out. The following morning, Subaru wakes up a new man. He finds Emilia and thanks her for helping him get the lead he's been so desperate to discover. When he's done, he joins Rem and Ram in the kitchen to begin his regular day's work. Up next, Subaru joins Ram and Rem on their way to the market to get supplies. While in the market, he plays around with the people and manages to put smiles on their faces. After getting their supplies, Ram insults Subaru and calls him a lowlife for embarrassing himself just so people can laugh. The children step in and defend their hero against the terrible Ram. While discussing with the girls, a little girl calls for Subaru and brings his attention to a little patch in the dark woods. Subaru walks into the woods and helps the girl recover her lost dog. When she gets her dog, he tries touching it, but the dog gets very annoyed at Subaru. Subaru approaches it gently and touches the head, which makes the dog smile. Life goes on normally for the trio until it gets almost dark and they return to the mansion. There, they meet Roswell, who was just stepping out to attend to some troublesome thing. Subaru is very surprised to see this happening, as this doesn't happen normally in his time leap. Subaru knows his plan is working, so he's encouraged to do more. By nightfall, he visits Betty to tell her about his findings. He concludes that he's been cursed. Now Betty has to find a way to lift the curse of him. Betty, however, tells him that there's nothing they can do at this point. Subaru, however, isn't ready to take no for an answer. He convinces or threatens Betty to save him, or else he'll let Puck know she's a wicked person. Betty sighs and places her hand on his forehead to see what will happen. Moments later, some black mist escapes from Subaru's right hand. Betty sees this and dispels the curse. Subaru gets very suspicious and recalls the little dog from earlier touching his right hand back then. He thanks Betty and rushes out of her room to meet Ram and Rem in the hallway. There, he tells them the truth and chooses one of them, Rem, to follow him to the village so he can challenge the folks there. Before they go, Emilia stops by to say hi. She notices the tension in the air and asks him about it. Subaru tells her he's just going out to settle something, and Emilia lets him go after giving him her blessing. Subaru and Rem race to the village only to find out that many of the village children have gone missing. He quickly races to that dark part of the woods and finds several green lamp barriers placed there. Rem notices a lamp that's been broken and immediately recognizes it as a witch fiend attack. He sends their entourage back to the village to seek help while he goes in to find the children. Rem tries to understand why Subaru would go so far for some children in just a random village. She asks him for the reason he's risking his life to save some kids, and Subaru gives her the anime talk of morals and not giving up. When they're done, Rem decides to follow him to the woods. Herself and Subaru track the scent of the kids deep into the forest. At one point, they smell something inhuman and follow the scent to a plain field. There, they find the children all lying there and weak to their bones. Subaru finds curse marks on some of their body parts and asks Rem to heal them with her magic. When she starts healing them, Petra, one of the children, wakes up from her slumber and tries to tell Subaru something. Unfortunately, she didn't last long enough to speak anything of importance. Subaru hushes her back to sleep and prepares himself to find the culprit by all means. He gets up, leaves Rem with the kids, and leaves after assuring Rem that he'll be fine. Subaru treads deep into the forest and finds one of the kids, the owner of the dog, lying there on the ground. Moments later, a cursed dog resembling the little puppy from earlier shows up for a little while and returns to the bushes before attacking Subaru. Subaru takes a bite from the dog and then hauls it up in the air before smashing it on the ground. A few seconds later, several other cursed dogs show up and rush towards Subaru for an attack. Thankfully, Rem arrives just in time to stop a few of them from killing Subaru. Subaru picks up the kid and takes her back to the village while Rem keeps the dogs at bay. When they become way too much for her to handle, she joins Subaru. Soon enough, the leader of the Cursed Dogs Association, the little puppy from earlier, shows up and controls his dogs to knock Rem out. After being knocked out, Rem's body awakens and transforms her into a madwoman. She laughs maniacally and takes out all the dogs she could find. Subaru sees the horrible state she's in and refuses to let Rem lose her mind. So, he pushes her out of the way and lets the dogs bite them. Rem gets back to her normal self and races towards Subaru to keep him alive. The following day, Subaru wakes up to find Ram and Rem fidgeting over his body. He's been injured but not killed in the wild dog attack. When they're gone, he finds Amelia and her pet, Puck, sitting on a chair not too far away as they wait for him to wake up to them. While Amelia sleeps, Puck shows his face and welcomes Subaru back to life. Subaru, after enduring various verbal abuses from the talking cat, asks after the sisters and where they went. Puck tells him Rem is back in the village to watch over the injured children. As for Amelia, she passed out while healing Subaru, so they should leave her to recover her strength before it's too late. A while later, Subaru gets off his bed and heads outside for a walk. He finds Ram there waiting for him, collects a freshly steamed potato from her stash, and throws it in his mouth. Shortly after eating, they discuss the state of the village after the attack. Ram thanks Subaru for helping the village take care of their Ulgarm problem. That's what the wild dogs were called, Ulgarms. Over the next few scenes, Subaru walks around the village to watch over the kids and ensure they're okay. After his little visit, he finds Betty, who asks for a word with him on the curse. When they get their time alone, Betty tells him it's virtually impossible to get rid of the curse he's under. Subaru asks for a reasonable explanation and Betty tells him he's been turned into witch fiend food. Instead of going into despair, Subaru remains calm and talks normally. Betty is surprised to find Subaru calm and collected, despite how fucked up his life is about to be. Subaru chills down and shows her his battle scars. The duo keep talking and talking until something very weird happens. Suddenly, Subaru gets a clairvoyant
Paulay sa mga 30 minutes. Saan na to patungo? Paano siya? Yeah. May naman balik ko about 30 minutes na paulay.